Hello, and welcome to episode number 147 of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Before we start, I want to thank my latest Patreon subscriber, Blake, for his support and all my other Patreon subscribers for their continued support. This podcast would struggle to continue without them, and my Patreon page has become a great place to learn about and to chat about all aspects of conducting. There'll be more about my Patreon page later on in this episode. Today, I conduct a conversation with a conductor who initially studied in her native Ireland before moving to the United States to continue her studies and become an assistant conductor. Since returning home, she started her own podcast and now also devises and runs courses and masterclasses for young conductors. It's a great pleasure to welcome Karen Ní Bhroin. Karen, it's wonderful to see you and to speak with you today. How are you?
Great, Mike. It's really lovely to be here.
Good, pleasure. It's always a pleasure. As you know, because I know you've listened to a lot of episodes, and thank you for being a fan, I always go right back to the beginning. And as far as I could go back, I've got you studying music education at Trinity College in Dublin, but I don't know what instruments you play or played, or when it started in your life, and whether you come from a musical family. How did music first enter into your world?
So I grew up in a completely Irish traditional music family and dance background, which I don't think a lot of people know. People here would know me as an Irish musician more so than classical. It was just always around us. My great grandmother taught Irish dancing, across several counties, and my aunt taught me and still teaches all over County Wexford and Waterford. So it was something I always just had in our bones from when we were born. And I was dying to play tin whistle. I was dying to, be able to participate in all these things. I was already Irish dancing at the time. And I said, it was about 2. And I said, I really want to learn. And my aunt said, well, I tell you what, if you learn your alphabet, your music alphabet, A to G, I'll teach you. Yeah. So I was determined. And my grandmother said, okay, let's do this. And she got the back of cornflakes boxes and made little stencils of A to G and my name. And we went over and over it again. And I don't know at that age if you have memories, but I think I do have, little recollections. I can still picture it. So off I took with this tin whistle. And I just loved it. And I was her little shadow. I just loved being kind of in that music world and meeting people all the time. So that's where it started. And we still play a lot as a family. In fact, this evening we're all going to an Irish dance class together because there's a big festival happening here and we have to get back in practice. So it's just always around us. And it was really, really lovely. But I didn't really know what classical music was for a very, very long time. And so I kind of just progressed in this Irish world until I hit secondary school, and we had a fantastic band program in the school, and I took up clarinet, and that's kind of where everything started to shift for me. My music teacher, my aunt Nora, she did have us read music, which is quite uncommon in Irish music. Yeah. So I was really lucky that I did read, but also had my good ears as well, I think, from learning by ear. So I was able to read, and I was doing piano, so I could read the bass clef, and I had all those skills, but didn't really know where to put them. And took off with clarinet and enjoyed it and loved being in the band. Actually loved hearing different textures, because in Irish music it's very treble heavy. You might have a rhythm section and a couple of chords, but it's essentially 8-bar phrases over and over again. And so this was like, oh wow, God, there's lots happening here. And I joined a youth orchestra, residential youth orchestra, where suddenly there were strings. It was like, oh wow, okay, gosh. And I could see what the conductor was doing was just fixing things and making it better. And I'd sort of started teaching at home, little kids, tin whistle, piano, whatever they needed help with that my aunt couldn't. I was sort of taking the surplus of students, and I was in that world. And I thought, I've kind of exhausted Irish music at this point. I've been doing it since I was 3. I'm now 16, and it's not really a challenge anymore. I can be good at it quite quickly. But clarinet, I wasn't great at. And, I'm sure the poor conductor was like, where is she? Half the time. Because it wasn't 8-bar phrases. And I thought, I think I want to be in this world. I think if I want to study music, I want a challenge. I don't just want this. And we had this program in our transition year of school when you're 16 that you could go do work experience somewhere. So I did 1 week in a primary school and swore I'd never be a primary school teacher. And then the second week I took out the golden pages, that big book of businesses where, I need a florist. Where do I find one? Whatever. I need a music school. And I looked it up and I found all these music schools. And then I saw the Royal Irish Academy of Music. And I thought, hang on, that's what my certificates say when I pass an exam. So they must also teach. And I wrote a letter, and I don't know who I sent it to, but so it got back to me anyway. And they said, yeah, sure, come for a week. And I spent a week with Deborah Kelleher, who's now the president. She was at the time head of theory. And she just took me under her wing and she said, okay, where are you at? Where's your theory at? What can we do? What do you want to do? And she told me about music education, the degree. And she said, it sounds like that's where you're headed anywhere. That's in your wheelhouse. And I kind of knew, Mike, that I wasn't strong enough as a clarinetist to, really make it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just had this inclination, like I haven't hit those markers, which is probably stupid because, what is it nowadays, age and time? But at the same time, I knew I wanted to progress quickly. So the Royal Irish Academy, they needed people in their wind band. So they said, well, you're not taking lessons, but you can come play clarinet for the end of semester. So I started there and then I auditioned and I got in. So for the end of my secondary school years, for the 2 years, every Saturday I'd travel to Dublin for theory, for clarinet, and then for orchestra or band, and then progressed into Trinity College through the academy. It was a joint course of music education, and that's when sort of everything classically opened up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's great about that story is, it doesn't matter where you start or how you start. If you start on the tin whistle and end up playing the clarinet at the Irish Academy, point being is that all the way through you've been interacting with other musicians. The whole point about Irish traditional music is that it's played in pubs, it's played in village halls, it's played on the corner of a street, but there's always more than one of you, and you can do it. And as you just said, like a family occasion later tonight when you all just get your instruments out and play.
Yeah,
but you've been surrounded with musicians all of the time, like other conductors who told me they joined their village band, or whether that be in Spain or in Austria, off the two of them off the top of my head. But that's great. I mean, the other thing to add, of course, is, don't do yourself down when you're young and think that you're not going to be good enough at 7. I know somebody, Ollie James, the principal clarinet of the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra. I'm pretty convinced I'm not wrong in saying that he only took up the clarinet when he was 17. He was a violinist before that. And he got the job about 5 or 6 years later. I mean, all right, it was in his genes. I think his granddad was also in the same job. But point being is that you can, if you find the right instrument, you can suddenly just go. You'd been playing the clarinet for a while and you knew that maybe it wasn't for you.
Yes.
So having got to Trinity College, you're doing your undergrad in music education. Is this when, I'm assuming now, this is when the C word really starts appearing, conducting? And do you look back and wonder, was there a seminal moment, or was it always something bubbling in the background, or something you wanted to try?
There wasn't a defining moment. I'm not one of those people that heard or was at a concert. However, back to the Irish music, I played piano in the Ceilidh band and my brother played drums. And a Ceilidh band is 10 people, a pianist and a drummer, and we set the tempo. We start and we keep everybody together. So we were sort of the mini conductors of this always going on. And in school, if there was ever anything to be put together, it was always up to me to put it together. I just had those leadership qualities. So when I joined the band or the youth orchestra, it was the person that I wanted to be rather than like the act of conducting. I wanted to make the music better. So actually at 18, I decided I wanted to be a conductor, and a very good friend of mine gave me my first baton on my 18th birthday. There's a picture of me standing with the cake, and instead of a knife, it's a baton. And then I started a year later at Trinity at 19. And at that time, David Brophy, who was principal conductor of the concert orchestra, was my composition teacher. And so in our first lecture on day whatever, I marched up and I said, I think I want to be a conductor. Will you teach me? Yeah. He said, all right, okay, what have you got? And my school principal, my primary school principal had phoned me that week and said, listen, I have a gospel choir that has no conductor. Are you up for it? And I said, yeah. I'd have conducted anything, Mike. If you said that the bell choir needed, I just wanted to get my hands on like making something better and making music with people. So it started there. And then the other person I mentioned earlier was the teacher of the high school, the secondary school band. he was somebody that never encouraged people to go into music. And I
Right.
said, I got my kind of, I got confident and I just said to him, don't tell me how not to, tell me how. And he said one word, he said Canford. That was all he said. So I
Canford.
went
Yeah.
home to Canford, yeah.
Yeah.
So I went home and I Googled it, and Canford was then Sherburn, had changed. And I thought, okay. And I just kept looking it up and made a decision that between my first and second year of college, that I was going to save my money and travel to Sherburn to see what all this conducting was about. So between those kind of private lessons in that first year and then traveling to Sherburn, that's when those seeds started to really take off.
And who was running Sherburn, or Canford as it used to be called at that stage?
George was still alive,
He was
actually.
still
George
there.
Hurst
Wow.
was
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah.
I got 3 years with George. Now, my first year, I was in the baby, very beginner class. He was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't near us at all. But Robert Houlihan and Rodolfo Saglan-Benny were there. And I didn't know Bobby. I got to know him, through Sherburn, but to have somebody else Irish there was just really nice, to kind
Yeah.
of click with. And I loved Rodolfo. And so that's where those relationships started to blossom. And I was there the year George passed away. I was one of George's last students, and I'd actually just managed to sort of get into the next category up. So
Right.
I can kind of say that I studied with him in a sense. I definitely learned from him, that's for sure. And that was sort of where I spent my summers for many years, being bottom of the camp, looking at all these other people, thinking, how can I get there?
Mm. I mean, anecdotally, I've been told by many people. I mean, I never met George Hurst, but I mean, his name goes right the way back. People like Simon Rattle were, touched by,
Yeah.
it goes a long way back. An awful lot of people I've spoken to about him say that, musically, if nothing else, it was his way or the highway.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, it sounds like he had people teaching underneath him. The levels below. Were they very much? Like the assistant manager of a football team, were they saying, you're going to learn to play 3-5-2 with wing backs because that's how when you get into the first team, that's what it's going to
Yeah.
be like. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming technically also they were teaching you the ways of George.
They were teaching me the ways of George.
Yeah.
And, I'd argue with myself that I went there for too long. But the other argument is I've really good technique and my body is in really great shape because I know how to stand. I
Mm.
know where, how not to cause an injury. I learned a lot in those formative years that I'm very, very grateful for. But musically, it did hold me back in terms of maybe it was too much on the technique for too long and not running through the music enough later on. I do remember my last year there, I sort of had this transformation where I was able to get through it. And because I now had ideas that I could bring to the table, they went, wow, you're done, leave, don't
Mm.
come back. And
Right.
that was a really, really lovely moment. But yes, for very many years, for me, especially, it was slow and steady and just about technique. When, other 24 and 5 year olds had taken off and were doing this, that, and the other, I just wasn't there, Mike. And I
Yeah.
also think because of my Irish background, which I'm now very grateful for, I don't think I could listen to a whole symphony until I was about 22 because I'd grown up listening to 8-bar phrases and then
Yeah.
another eight. So the fact that you were thrown this mass wall of music, it was just too much. Brahms especially was too much until I was about 25 or 6, until I could get through those layers, just adjusting my ears. Now, in my 30s, my ears are so strong from that Irish music, but it's something I tried to hide in my 20s, and especially at Sherburn when other people musically could get further than me and I was still stuck in that technique. So pros and cons to it, but I'm very grateful for it now.
The next thing that appears is a change of continent, a change of place.
Yes.
Is to go to Ohio and Kent State University and to get your master's in orchestral conducting. It says, wherever I read my homework from, that your teacher was Dr. Jung Ho Kim.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, if you've spent 3 summers with in the school of George Hurst and also had lessons with David Brophy privately, what was your teaching like in Ohio. And how different a world was that? I mean, you've left home, you've left Ireland,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's suddenly a complete change. How did it go? And was it a big change in how you were taught?
Yes and no. I'm going to fill in the gap slightly because
Yeah,
when I finished all of the Sherburne stuff, I actually freelanced in Ireland for 5 years.
right.
But there's nothing really to write about except for those final 2 years. I was conductor in training with the RTE Symphony Orchestra and the Philharmonic Choir,
Yeah,
mainly with the choir, if I'm honest. And I'd also got a lunchtime concert with the NSO. So I was sort of starting to transition out of student mode and not really sure where to go.
yeah.
And I had auditioned for 2 years solid. I was auditioning
Huh,
all over. I'd also started studying with Neil Thompson at this point, and Neil was really the person who musically pushed me the most, I would say, out of my Sherburne years and into no, get through a symphony, Karen, and see how it goes.
mm,
John Longstaff is somebody who has also like bet phrasing and music into me for many years as I was trying to, get into this world of what's next. So the 2 years of auditioning everywhere were extremely tough, but also very formative. So I sort of knew what was possible at this point. And America was definitely not on the cards at all. I
right.
was staying somewhere in Europe. That was where I was going. And in the mix of all of this, the last boost of confidence I needed was I'd been made a Britain Peers Young Artist with Marin Alsop for 2 weeks. I hadn't yet got the Ohio position, but as it turned out, it was the 2 weeks right before I moved to Ohio.
Right.
So it all kind of happened in a bit of a slap. And I'm there having auditioned for 2 weeks. I got the call from Britain Peers, you've been made this. So I think, right, well, I'm doing something right, but I'm still not getting anywhere. In a former life, I taught Irish music in upstate New York. And when I was there, I went to Eastman. I did a summer institute
Right.
at Eastman to see what it would be like. And this man, Dr. Jung Ho Kim, was finishing his doctorate at Eastman when I did the summer institute. And like we do it, everybody add each other on Facebook and all the rest of
Yeah.
it. So it was February, and I'm sitting there 2018. I'm like, oh, Jesus, am I really going to do another year of auditions, to see, do I come second again or am I
Yes.
going to take off? And he had a post up that said, please spread the word. I'm looking for an assistant conductor at Kent State University. All fees paid. Will pay you to be there. Lots of podium. So I was like, I'm here. It's me.
Hello. Yeah. Yeah.
And he was like, why do you want to come here? I was 28 at the time. And I said, well, I don't actually have a master's and
Yeah.
I don't really want the piece of paper, but what you're offering sounds fantastic. So he said, well, send me on your videos. And at this point, I'd made my debut with the NSO. So I had quite good footage to send in.
It's
And I
always
still,
important for somebody in that position. I
oh,
mean,
so
yeah,
important.
anybody
And
taking up conducting now at any stage, get a GoPro or get somebody to
yeah,
film you at every possible
record
opportunity.
everything.
Yeah.
Never don't press record. Like even
Right.
when you think it's not great, just record everything. So I had good footage and I sent it off. But I was petrified of these ear tests, that you
Right.
have at every audition. And I said to Jung Ho, what's involved? And he said, right, well, I'm going to give you the orchestra for an hour. And I was afraid to ask about ear tests. And he said, I'll know from your ear and I'll know from your rehearsing if you've a good ear or not.
Yeah.
You have an hour on Die Fledermaus and Finlandia, and your job is to make them better.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, I can do this. Like, this is what I do every day. This is fine. And I won the audition.
Good.
And kind of overnight was like, oh God, here we are. We're moving to Ohio. And so I'd earned, I was in Dublin earning money, conducting amateur groups at nighttime, but oh, you're going to give all that up and move out. And it just felt like the right thing to do. And so the 2 weeks before that, I had studied with Marin for the first time. And I remember thinking with her as well, it just clicked. I really loved her way of teaching. She was extremely hard on me. But I seemed to soar in the 2 weeks and things unlocked that had never unlocked before. So as I'm going to Ohio, I'm thinking, oh, please let this teacher be good. Like I've had an amazing 2 weeks. What have I signed myself up for halfway across the world? But Jung Ho was incredible. He'd had a stroke at 36 and he was in his early 40s. I couldn't use, his body to full capacity as he'd like. So I learned so much from him. And the reason I took the position, Mike, and I think this is important to any young conductor listening, The orchestra rehearsed 3 times a week, had 5 concerts a year, and I conducted on at least 3 of those concerts, and I conducted the orchestra at least once a week. I
Oh,
also did all the stage
perfect.
and orchestra rehearsals for opera. I conducted one full performance of the opera, did all the opera scenes, concerts. I was doing everything. Like I
Mm.
didn't want a master's. I just wanted, to get my hands on music and to not be conducting a piano, to
Yeah.
actually be conducting an orchestra. And Jung Ho was fantastic. I'd conduct, say, on a Monday, and we'd look at my video Tuesday, and I would have to change whatever he requested by Wednesday. Same Thursday for Friday. The rate of growth was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the perfect year of, or however long you were there, of just non-stop conducting, non-stop learning,
Absolutely.
non-stop assessing what you're doing,
Yeah.
changing, trying, guessing,
Yeah.
getting it wrong. But also, as you rightly said, most importantly, not just with two pianos or one piano. You're doing it
Yeah.
with live musicians. I know pianists aren't dead, but you know what I mean. With
Yeah.
musicians who can crescendo.
Yes.
More's the point. And sustain. Oh, it's perfect. I mean, I can think of conducting courses in the UK where you get a lot of time with musicians, with orchestras
Yeah.
and ensembles, but not to that extent. I can also think of courses where you get virtually none, which seems a
Yeah.
bit pointless. But
Totally.
yeah, I mean, what a brilliant. It was brave and it took guts to do it, but I think
Mm.
looking ahead at what came afterwards, I think it was obviously a very, very good thing that you did it.
I just treated it like a retreat, Mike. I was 28, as I said, and people at that age were doing a lot more at 28. I was going back, if you will, to go forward, but I also knew I could do it. And I had auditioned at so many places. And I remember Ken Montgomery, um, rest in peace. I auditioned for him, and he just said to me, Karen, you're a great amateur conductor. This was at The Hague, the
Right.
NMO,
Yeah, yeah.
and that my eyes filled with tears. And what I wanted to say to him was, I know I'm doing it 5 nights a week, but
Yeah.
I believe in me. I need someone else to believe in me. Of course, I'm a good amateur conductor, but I know I have what's in me. I know I have it to make it to the next level, but I just couldn't find somebody who believed as much as I did in myself. And Jung Ho did. He really did. And it was an incredible 2 years where I remember conducting my first opera, Copeland's Quiet City. Sorry, not Quiet City, Tenderland.
Mm.
And because he'd had the stroke, he only has one vocal cord. So he shouts a lot because he doesn't know how loud he is. And he was
Right.
screaming at me. So I turned around, I was like, stop me. And he was like, oh no, you're really good. It's just a couple of things. And I'm like, you've just battered me for a good 3 hours already. You know
Yeah.
how much. But it was that kind of mental agility that I needed. And every morning I was up very early and I was learning languages. I had downloaded apps to try build my ears up. I went on total immersions into, okay, what conductor will I study this week, and went through their biographies and watched live recordings of symphonies and stuff. It was time that I'd never given myself ever, but suddenly I'm in a country. I kind of, it's not that I didn't want friends. I have great support network at home, but I wasn't there to build a community. I was there to conduct.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did. I just put my head down for 2 full years.
The next thing, whilst we're staying in the States, the next bit, become assistant director of the Akron Symphony Chorus in Ohio, still in Ohio, and then to North Carolina. And
Yes.
the big 2 years with the Winston-Salem Symphony Orchestra in North Carolina as assistant conductor. If we go back a few steps, you said you were conductor in training with the RTE National Symphony Orchestra, but now you're an assistant conductor in America. Two orchestras, obviously. I'm assuming in both cases you had access to players who were going to give you advice.
Yeah.
Um, but what were the big differences? Because I mean, we're gonna when we go on in about two questions time to talk about your podcast and the courses you now run. This will become an interesting thing. But when you became an assistant conductor, how did it differ from what you did back in Dublin with the RTE National Symphony Orchestra?
With the RTE, I was primarily there to, really learn from the choir. And they gave me a lot of opportunity. I would do a lot of the warm-ups. I would give the final notes before a concert. I was acting chorus master for my last performance there, which was Beethoven 9. I got to really I guess because I put myself forward, especially with Natalie, she treated me as a proper assistant, not just assistant of the chorus master, which was just
Mm.
fantastic. I ran sight singing classes. I just did whatever the hell I could get my hands on. But outside of RTE, I was running my own ensembles and I was doing a lot of the dog work,
Yeah.
the librarian for your own orchestra, the finances, all of that. When I moved to Ohio to do my master's, because they were paying me, I still ended up being that librarian running the orchestra, stuff that I thought I'd got rid of, but hadn't. So that was
Yeah.
kind of it. That was like, oh, I've made it now. You don't do that stuff anymore. That was a lesson I learned quickly. And when I moved to Winston-Salem, it was a similar thing where actually when I got that job, I had met Tim Redmond at Dartington. That was one of the last courses in the UK that I had always said I wanted to do. And I did it and I met Tim and he said, you must remind me that you're in the States. I'm about to move out there and, there might be some work. So he calls and he says, will you be acting assistant conductor for my first concert? There isn't an assistant. I'm doing the Rite of Spring. There's no risers on stage. I want to see what it sounds like in the
Yeah.
hall and I trust you.
Mm.
So flew down from Ohio. What I didn't know was that he was going to ask me in the dress rehearsal to conduct the end of part one. So up I go, like knees rattling. And I'm like, I cannot let anybody see that I'm nervous. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I conducted it. And they said, are you our next assistant conductor? And the orchestra were just so warm.
Yeah.
And I said, oh God, no, no. My dream was to go off and do my doctorate with Marin for its security of my visa more than anything.
Yeah.
And anyway, time went on and they offered me the job. They said, look, we normally do a search, but Tim really likes you. It's in his contract that he can appoint. We don't want to waste money on a search. When
Yeah.
I was there that week, I had done the pre-concert talks and I'd done some donor lunches and stuff. So they kind of knew what they were getting themselves in for. I signed the contract in January. And of course, March, I was down for the launch of the new assistant conductor and COVID hit. And I really wasn't sure. I mean, I had signed a contract, but they were starting to furlough people.
Right.
And as luck would have it, I was on a student visa, which meant I could get back out there quicker than anybody else because they were allowing student visas into the country ahead of Tim, ahead of anybody.
Yeah.
They furloughed 40% of their staff. So I went out and I became the assistant conductor, the librarian, the personnel manager. I was running the 4 youth orchestras. Like it was insane. Like I ran myself into the ground. But I had all of this experience from Dublin, from working at NSO, from being in Ohio. And I just laughed. I was like, every time I think I'm getting out of doing this work, it comes back. But actually, it was coming back. I was getting the jobs because I was good at it. And now it comes to a point later on where that was holding me back. And musically, I needed to let go of all of that and push on. However, I started to win positions because of it.
But at that point also, I mean, we all went through COVID, and I can tell you as a freelance conductor in the UK, I'd have been dying to go and run 4 youth orchestras and a library and to be paid for it. My God.
Yeah. Well, and that was it. It was the guilt.
Sweet diddly squat, which is what we got from the UK government. Yeah, and let's not get on that hobby horse. But
but you're right, though. When I felt this immense pressure of, I went back to Ireland from March to August, and then I got in a plane not knowing when I'd get back. But there was no choice. And as well as Winston-Salem, the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, they'd asked me to come on board as an associate conductor. So I was going out to the States with a job and a half. And honestly, Mike, I was conducting 7 days a week with very little time off because the ensembles were smaller. So instead of having one orchestra, you had 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, like Ohio, it was this time where, oh my God. And now suddenly I'm doing it without a teacher. So I'm conducting 3, 4 ensembles a day. I mean, especially with the university, because I was the only one there with the orchestras, I do 45 minutes on Suk Serenade and then go into a different room, again, all masked up and all the rest of it, and do Tchaikovsky Serenade for Strings or whatever it was. It was literally one to the other constantly. So I was going through repertoire like nobody's business. And I had to find out who I was as a conductor and prepare all these scores. at such a rate without anybody there. And then I'm in this position where, Tim is trying to get into the country, but we don't know if he will until 5 days before. So I really am assistant and cover conductor. I'm not just saying I'm a cover conductor, and if someone gets a cough, I'll have to jump in.
Yeah.
This is, we don't know if he'll get on a plane or not.
Yeah.
So like, it was kind of 4 of the craziest years of my life between Ohio and North Carolina.
But conducting filled, which is what we want.
Absolutely.
Very recently, you've been given or awarded a Tacky Fellowship Award.
Yes.
Marion Alsop's Tacky Concordia, it used to be called, but I think it's now just called
exactly.
What does that entail? What does that mean?
So the Tacky Alsop Fellowship, you're right, it was Tacky Concordia. It's now Tacky Alsop because Marin's funding quite a lot of it, actually.
Yeah.
It's this amazing fellowship with just the most fabulous conductors that form a community that help each other. Obviously, we've got Marin as our mentor as well, which is a huge part of that. And she advocates for us. She tries to find opportunities for us where we can. All of the awardees got a financial award, which is obviously huge and helps greatly. For me personally, it's as I push through each level, it's knowing that I can go sit in a room with Marin, watch her rehearse, talk to her about the score afterwards, see her rehearsal procedure with different orchestras, not just her orchestra, but as she guest conducts as well. We have these great one-on-one sessions online with whatever. I had a bad experience in a country last year that I'd never worked in before. And I was able to call up on those people that I knew had worked there. And they said, oh, no, you're not crazy. Such and such is. Don't worry about it. You're fine.
Yeah.
So it's just this community that, as Marin says, her motto is we want to be happy and helpful. And, we have a little WhatsApp group. We were talking about repertoire all last week. Does anybody have repertoire for this, that, and the other? And it's a collective that really comes together to try help each other and the next generations. And then something that came in this week is a new commission that they're funding. And who has an orchestra that would like this new commission will fund the rental, the parts, all of that kind of thing. So there are endless possibilities with it, and it's just an honor to be part of it. I'd looked up to Holly Matheson and people like that, Gemma New, that have been part of this over the years, and it's lovely to now be in it.
Well, you just mentioned 2 names I've interviewed already, plus Marin, of course. I think that's episode 51, dear listener, if you want to go back that far. I think I've interviewed 4 or 5 other people who've gone through Marin's program. It sounds brilliant. I mean, I'm trying to do a similar thing with my Patreon group of conductors. There's a WhatsApp group for us, which is already, somebody asked a question about opera scores and librettos, and we got it all sorted between us. I think it's very important that you support each other. I'm going to hover on one thing, which was actually going to be my next question anyway. But you talked about having a bad experience guesting, and we've all had them. Everybody has. Guest conducting, you've got, lots in the diary. I've looked at your diary, LSO coming up, RPO coming up, something in Salzburg coming up. Was that Salzburg or Lucerne? I can't remember. Bregenz, yes, I knew it was an opera place, yeah. Do you have any strategies for coping when you suddenly jet your way into a new country, a new place, and that, the speed dating, that is 10:15 or 10 o'clock on a Monday morning with a brand new orchestra, when you put that beat down and you have no idea what's going to come back, when it's going to come back, all of that.
It's hard, Mike. And I think, going from those 4 years in the States, which were just heavy going, I made the decision to come home unemployed, to cut those ties. I didn't renew my contracts because I thought this is the life that I wanted. So that was already a huge leap. I think I only had 2 guest engagements lined up, but I knew that if I didn't leave the States, that the rest weren't going to come in as easily. And one of the things that I wanted to do coming out of America was get out of the American system of working too much. And that sort of applies to the guest conducting as well. I don't know that we'll ever have the right work-life balance as musicians, but I think what's a weekend? But I do think it's extremely important as a conductor that when you walk in there, that you're the best that you can be on that day. And that's not just musically, but mentally as well. Physically, of course, too. We have to look after ourselves. So I've sort of tried to take on what I know I'm able for. That's number one. I
Yeah.
don't like take on anything that I know I'm not able for. I'll say that would be lovely, but in a year or two, I'm not there yet. And I have no shame in saying that. For me, it's about sleep, getting the right amount of sleep and good food, and then learning in advance so that I'm not panicked going in there. But it's hard. I mean, you stand
Mm.
up in front of them and you don't want to be overly friendly. You don't want to be too cross. You want to, there's all the psychology behind it. How do you walk to the podium? So my thing is I just walk in confidently, I say good morning and I start.
Yeah.
And then I go from there and I try show them that I'm listening. I've seen over the years many conductors sort of in the same realm as me that go in and they're conducting the same way on day one as they are the concert. They have
Mm.
the moves, and that's just not my style. I want to go
Me
in to
neither.
listen. No,
Yeah.
and it really annoys me because nothing actually changes. So I listen to what they have to offer and I try assess the situation. I'm a good reader of rooms, which I think helps as well. And I try smile at everybody by the time I've got to the end of a rehearsal. Now that's not that can be just I know you have a solo smile. It
Yes.
doesn't have to be anything else. But I think everybody in the room needs to be acknowledged. And then reading the room in terms of, especially when it's these education shows that are quite quick, like once they've played it through and it hasn't fallen apart, don't mess with it. They don't
Yeah.
care what your rendition of Dvorak is. They're not there for that, but they will turn up a half an hour later and they'll play it much better because the camera's on or whatever. And you just have to trust that. You have to know why you're there, what the guest situation is, and how far you can push them. Not how far you can push them, but how far that they should be pushed on that day.
Yeah. And especially with something like a schools concert, and for those not listening in the UK, you know, uh, I'm I can refer to the fact that you might get a 3 hour rehearsal before the day of the concert, and then a short rehearsal on the day of the concert, and that's it. Some places you just get 3 hours on the day, and that's all you're going to get.
Yeah.
Um,
This
uh,
year with the
yeah,
LSO, I did an hour and 15 minutes and then two shows back to back. That was
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the most important thing about that is that you need to get the orchestra in a position, in a place where they are happy that they can do those shows
Yeah.
comfortably and they
Yeah.
feel prepared and they feel ready. They're not waiting to have an astounding interpretive point of view come at them when they're
Absolutely
playing
not.
the theme from Angry Birds or they're playing,
No. Yeah.
whatever it is they might end up playing. They just want to feel, if there's little extracts, run through the extracts, make sure everybody knows what they're
Yeah.
doing and all of that.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, with that is that if you get known as being really good and efficient at that, that's all they ever offer you. But
Well, yeah,
but
that's
that's
my next.
fine.
I'm in that realm
As
at the
long
minute.
well,
Yeah.
as long as you're, I mean, I've been in that realm and still in that realm with certain orchestras. Point being is, as long as you're happy to be pigeonholed by them, but then another orchestra,
Yes.
I've been to the BBC Symphony Orchestra, the BBC Philharmonic, and I've conducted literally everything with them. Whereas,
Yes.
I go
Yeah.
to Liverpool and do certain things, and Birmingham I do everything, but I go to Scandinavia and do film music, or I go to, it doesn't matter, it doesn't bother me
Yeah.
either
You
way.
just find
Um,
your feet.
exactly, you find your
Yeah.
place. There's one thing that we have in common. And we're doing it right now, which is
Yes.
podcasting. You started one, and it's called And Other Duties, and it's basically about the life of being an assistant conductor. And we've listened to all of the jobs that you've had to do, but I listen to every episode of your podcast, and it's very much also about how do you serve the main conductor who you're assisting as well. It's
Yeah.
a lot of psychology in there. There's a
Yep.
lot of placing yourself in the industry, where at
Mm.
which point or which level you're at.
Hmm.
Why did you want to start that? Was that because of your experiences, those mad 4 years of going from Ohio to North Carolina and learning
Yeah.
so much in such a short space? And
Pretty much.
sorry, the other thing I was going to say is, sorry for butting in, that by that point in history, there were quite a lot of podcasts out there, including this very one, but nobody was doing anything about assistant conductors. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I might have spoken. It's sort of something I've whizzed past in other people's interviews on here, but not something I've lingered on. I mean, I don't wonder whether that was also one of the reasons.
I think for me, exactly what you said, and put in the 2 years at RTE as well. I
Yes.
had all this experience where I was at the point in my fourth year now in America where I was auditioning all over the place. And I was helping the people I was auditioning with prepare for their interviews.
Yeah.
Like, as stupid as that sounds, I was mentoring the people I was against. Oh God, how do you answer this? And I had no worries about doing it because I do believe everything happens for a reason. And, if they like me, they'll appoint me. And if they don't, whatever, it's not
Yeah.
meant to be. And I realized that although these people are excellent conductors, excellent musicians, they haven't a clue. I was like, how clueless are they?
Yeah.
They had never programmed and written their own education show. They didn't know how to interact with the artistic team, how to make a schedule for something to happen, how to stay on time. And so I thought, actually, I'm quite good at all of this. And it's things that I've shied away from in the past, but these are skill sets. It suddenly dawned on me that all of those years that I'd spent doing 700 things was for a reason.
Yeah.
And that reason was to make me ultimately a better person and conductor long term. And so I played around with all sorts of, like, what realm am I in? And I was having all of this guesting, but I guess I was coming out of the period of being an assistant conductor. I think what's important to say here is that I don't think I'll ever fully finish being an assistant. I think we should always help each other, but it's on what level. I had exhausted the level of learning in certain realms, but in other realms I haven't. And I think, if you were at a concert, I know you'd sit out in the hall and help me basically with balance. And
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah.
something we should always be doing with each other. However, I just wanted to get my point across because as I was interviewing at different places and meeting people, I realized no one knew what the assistant conductor was.
Mm.
And I went on a deep dive across the globe of job descriptions, and they hadn't a clue. And this one line and other duties,
Yeah.
whatever they needed,
Yeah.
basically. And I thought there's something in this. So I moved home and I'm starting to tell my story and I want to kind of get out there more. And I decided to pick 8 guests that I really trusted and that I knew had a different story. And that's basically where it all came from, to help other young conductors. Because Mike, I listened to your podcast as soon as it came out because it was suddenly there was something tangible. You'd find other conductors interviewed on podcasts that aren't really about conducting or music. It might be
No.
leaders, but it's such a lonely profession with no career path. Like, there just isn't one. Everybody's story is so different. And I had felt lost on numerous occasions, but I also had good mentors. But I wanted people to be able to get to the middle ground. It's
Mm.
great to be able to get to the top ground. And I'm a very driven person. So I think I was lucky that I had that in me and I could listen to your episodes. And, Jaime Martin, as you mentioned earlier, I think you alluded to him being in a band, and all of those types of things had clicked in with me, and thinking, okay, well, we're all different, but no one ever spoke about how they get to the middle.
Yeah.
And when you're in the middle, what are you supposed to do? Because the thing about being an assistant conductor is that it's the only time in our lives where we have all of this time to learn music. When you start to get engagements, you've music thrown on you. Now, you do have
Mm.
music thrown on you as an assistant conductor as well, but you're allowed to make mistakes as an assistant that you can't later on.
No, not when you're on your own. No.
No, not when you're
Exactly.
on your own. And there are there are questions you can ask. And sort of, say, for me as a clarinetist, I knew I needed to get more in depth with bowings and phrasings and how to really feel the sound of the strings so that when I'm standing in front of an orchestra, I can articulate that and not sound like an idiot.
Mm.
So there were all of these things that I had accumulated that I realized were missing from so many people.
Mm.
And so many people attending conducting courses, but like they hadn't a hope of ever making it to any other level because they could conduct and that was it. And we're in this world now where most musicians have multifaceted careers, let alone conductors. When you're talking about fundraising and setting up initiatives and forming communities, I just wanted to tell my story and help share the stories of others to inspire people on their way up.
I think it was a brilliant idea. I think that it's very necessary. For instance, very soon I'm going back to the Liverpool Philharmonic and doing a week of schools concerts with Alistair Malloy, who, we'd have shared the stage together about 140 times by the end of the week after next. But often we will discuss, he, like an assistant conductor, will have people thrust upon him. He'll go and do his presenting elsewhere, and he'll just get the staff conductor, who has absolutely no idea about how to interact with a presenter in a schools concert. And these are skills that are not taught when you do
Nope.
your masters, or I remember during doing Toby Purser's Conductors in Isolation, I did a
Yes.
session on how best to rehearse a John Williams evening. I also did, rehearsal orders for things like,
Yeah.
how to not upset an orchestra with a rehearsal order if you've got a pre-rehearsal day or if you just do it all on the day. Again, things that aren't taught in your
No.
masters or, in your conducting. I think they are starting to happen. I know that Mark and Clark do bits of that
Yes.
in Manchester, but it's something that just gets dropped by the wayside because everybody's looking. You were talking then about being in the middle. Everybody's looking to go to the top.
Yeah.
It's tough at the top. Well, it's also tough in the middle as well.
Exactly.
But there are certain skills you need to learn to live well in the middle. And I
Totally.
would call myself very much an in the middle conductor. Who you need to be much more of a chameleon. You're not just going to turn up every
Oh,
week and
it's
do
harder.
an overture, concerto, and a symphony.
No. No.
In fact, when you
Much
get
harder.
those concerts, they feel really easy.
They're a breeze.
Yeah, they are. Compared to a school's concert, compared to a family concert,
Totally. Yeah.
compared to an evening of 18 Bollywood songs, which I did at the Proms.
Oh, oh, lovely.
But it was very, very tricky.
Yeah.
And there are skills that you need that you highlighted on your podcast that are very necessary. The spin-off from your podcast has been you now run courses with Tim Redmond.
Yes.
I've met Tim a couple of occasions. I know his brother much better. I've shared the stage with Tom on numerous occasions when he's presented concerts. And I noticed the next course coming up is all to do with doing a recording session. Is that right?
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
again is a skill that's not discussed often when you go and study conducting. And I'm doing my air quotation marks, dear listener. When you go and study all of that, pulling faces, moving
Yeah.
your arms, don't bend your knees, all that stuff. But you don't learn about how to run a recording session. And
No,
how
you
to
don't.
interact with the person on the other side of the screen who you're speaking to on a microphone.
Totally. And here's the thing is that I think young conductors, and I use young not by age, but young in your profession, whatever age you are and whatever age you decide to come back to conducting.
Absolutely.
We very put ourselves in that box of, oh, I'm going to be such and such a conductor. There's no way I ever thought I needed to know how to record. And yet we're landed in COVID and I'm running the camera angles on everything. It was just mad. And as a result, then I can now record. I've been the producer, the this, that, and the other. And you realize, well, actually, if I want to be music director and I want to record all of Bruckner symphonies or whatever your dream is, you have to know that stuff. It's not just going to, miraculously come to you on that day. So I think what we're trying to offer with Under the Duties is every course is bespoke and every one is a new set of skills to do with some aspect of the profession, but actually you need all of the skills. You need to be able to do the education, the recording, you need to be able to conduct a professional orchestra at a high level, you need to have these conversations. And what we're hopefully giving, or I think we are giving, is that safe space to learn, to make the mistakes, and then to say, I know how to do that. And here's the thing, when people are interviewing and auditioning now for assistant and associate positions, they're looking for really good conductors. They're not looking for somebody that's come out of their masters and can conduct well. They're looking for somebody that can slot into the organization, that is able to help on so many different levels, because the money isn't there to have all of the staff that we would like to have in many of these situations. So the more helpful you can be, the quicker you're going to slot right in.
Absolutely agreed. Well, good on you both for doing the courses. I hope maybe you'll make some more episodes of the podcast. I don't know whether you've got any plans to do so.
In the pipeline.
In the pipeline. Good. Because, as I just said, next to me on my desk is a pile of music I'm doing in Liverpool. There's about 14 pieces of music on there, and you have to learn the scores quickly. There's an 11th question, and because we get through masses of scores, I'm assuming you have a process. I'm assuming you have a way of learning your scores. And also know about the geekiest of all questions. Are you a red, blue, black highlighter pen person? Or are you somebody who likes to keep it clean and tidy? How do you go about learning your scores?
I'm both. I'm a red blue person, but I use them kind of sparingly. So I phrase everything. For me, it's all about knowing the phrase structure of the entire piece. I mean, large and small. So I want to know the form of the piece. But my main thing is I'll do like a the square root symbol is what I use, and I
Right.
insert the number. So square root of 4, 4-bar phrase. And then I use blue for the instruments playing the melody or other entries that I need to be aware of, and red for dynamics. Recently, I've started to use green for the bigger structures. So if it's sonata form, I'll write what section we're in, or if I'm doing the harmonic analysis, I'll do it in green. Um, and just sort of things to be aware of. And then for me, like all week, I'm preparing track 4 at the minute. And because of my strong ear, I hear that bloody first movement on the downbeat instead of the
Yeah.
second beat. So I've been banging the piano out trying
Right.
to get it into me, while sort of internalizing everything as well as much as I can. But I definitely mark my scores, but in a clean way.
Good. Well, I'm much the same. I'll use a ruler. I use my
Yeah.
red, blue, and black in different ways to you, but they do mean something.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, red is anything to do with my hands and arms and tempo and beating. Blue is all the dynamics and the articulations, and black I use for entries and whatever else. But
Yes.
I can pick up a score of, we're both sitting in front of bookshelves, but listeners, like most conductors are when I do this podcast. I can open up and I know exactly what's in there, and I know what I did
Totally.
last time, and
Yeah.
maybe where I'm going to go next time. So
I'll
yeah,
add to that. Sorry to put across you. I'll add to
no,
it because we were just looking at notebooks earlier. I have a stash of notebooks here in my early years where I wrote down my analysis in it without writing the music. So I do this, square root 4 flute and main melody, oboe, counter melody, strings accompaniment. And my test to myself was if I could sing through what I'd written in the notebook, I knew the score. Now, I don't really have the time to do that anymore, but I will do it on A4 pages and stick it into the score. So instead of, flicking through 50 pages of a movement, I can just look at it on 3. And I might not know, every single melody by just what I've written, but I know the structure very quickly.
I know Paavo Bergman used to do something similar where I used to look up and think, why has he only turned 3 pages through in the entire symphony? It's because he'd written a sort of shorthand score for
Yes.
himself.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful musician, wonderful conductor. But yeah, I think, if you can do that shorthand, it's an aid memoir for learning
Totally.
the
Yeah.
whole piece. So yeah,
Totally.
definitely very, very good. For a very long time, I've promised to write a series of articles about string playing for non-string playing conductors. If you go to my Patreon page, you will discover that I've written the first 3 parts of that series, and more will be appearing soon. If you're a young conductor and want to learn a little bit more about string playing, then these articles are perfect for you. Subscribing is very easy, and you'll gain access to articles, tour diaries, and over 40 hours of interviews and bonus mini-episodes, as well as much, much more. If you subscribe annually, you'll get a discount, and a further discount if you are a student. All of this can be found at patreon.com/a mic on the podium, and from just £5 a month, you can gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. That's patreon.com. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Karen Ní Bhroin. Karen, you know what's coming. As a regular listener, you know exactly what's coming. Even though I always send the conductors the email with the 10 questions, but you've probably heard them more than most. And so you'll know that we always start with what sound or noise do you love and what sound or noise do you hate?
I get very overwhelmed by very loud sounds or dance music or anything that's sort of over processed, sirens, anything like that. I walk around with my AirPods in and probably don't even listen to anything half the time, just noise cancelling. But the sound that I love, then the other side of that is just being in nature, just whatever's going on. I'm a water person, so I really love being near the sea if I can at all.
Lovely. Over processed. Yeah, dance music.
Can't. Kills me.
Oh, I had a very interesting experience the other day. I went to watch the CBSO Youth Orchestra give a concert with Jack Van Steen, who, of course, I interviewed in episode 4 or something way back when. And I'd done all the rehearsals, so I went to watch the concert. I went to use the facilities, as they say, before the concert started. And I've been in places like Helsinki Airport where there's bird song piped into the public
Lovely.
conveniences.
Perfect.
There was music being piped into the public conveniences, and I'm still not quite sure how I took, doing what I needed to do whilst listening to the main theme from Schindler's List.
Oh,
It just seemed
wow.
a most
Wow. God,
peculiar piece of music to pipe through into the toilets.
lovely.
So yeah, I know. Yeah. So yeah, frankly just give me silence or bird song. That'd be nice.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
bird song is fine. I can cope with that.
Number 3. If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
You know, I just went skiing and was reminded of how much I bloody love it. And I would spend the whole day on the mountain. But everything, you know, get up and go to the French bakery and eat all the carbs because you know you're going to burn them off all day. Ski all day, get a big dirty burger and chips halfway down the mountain on your way back. Make sure you stop in for the van show around 4 o'clock and just time it so that you've got the last lift by 5 o'clock and you're home, and then sit in the spa all evening before your dinner, and then a good dinner, couple of glasses of red wine, and fall asleep exhausted but happy. I just think it's such a privilege to be on top of the Alps. It's just amazing. And the sound of nature all around you, it's so healing.
I've been on top of the Alps, occasionally in winter, but I've never skied. So I've always been worried about hurting myself quite badly.
Yeah, but you know what? It's such a mental switch off because you have to
Yeah,
think
of
about
course.
your feet.
Yes.
So you can't actually think about anything else. It's amazing. I love it.
No, we need that mental switch off. We need the squeeze of the sponge and, to get
Totally.
all of the music out of our head. The good point or the good news about your answer is that you mentioned food on at least 3 occasions and alcohol. So which means I'm looking forward to question 10 now, which is good. I always look forward to it anyway, but that's good news. Let's stick to what we do. And number 4, can you name your favorite conductor or conductors of yesteryear?
I was thinking about this one, and it's a tricky one. So I'm going to go with the kind of an off-piste, if you will, answer. I
Good.
always go to Boulez when I look at Stravinsky recordings. And I'm specifically talking about recordings, not physically what he looks like. And both Stravinsky and Mahler, I just love how clean it is. Because for me, as I mentioned, listening to those layers and textures was extremely difficult. And as soon as I found his recordings, I thought, yeah, that's it. That's what I need. Every detail is there. You can hear all of it. And I just wish that I had the opportunity to have seen what went on in rehearsals to how we got to that level. But he's somebody that I always go back to when looking at, for that information.
Well, I agree with you with Stravinsky. I would disagree with you with Mahler, but that's a conversation for another day. What I can say is I was lucky enough. He came to Birmingham once, and I was in
Oh,
the
nice.
orchestra, and we did Petrushka. What I can say to you is he had the most amazing ear, as I'm sure everybody knows.
Wow.
The
Yeah,
most
yeah. I
amazing
mean, not
ear.
surprising, but
Yeah, and he also taught me a technical thing, which I'm happily divulge with you away from the podcast about how to play pizzicatos together. He taught us all
oh,
that, um,
cool.
which was wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to rack my brains. I don't think anybody said Boulez, and for such a massive name in our industry, in classical music world, both as a composer and a conductor. I'm really
Yeah, I'm
surprised his name's not come
fascinated.
up very often, if at
Well, I'm
all.
also fascinated by the composer conductor shift,
Mm,
and how we went from Mendelssohn, who was also conducting, and Mahler, and all of that. I'm really fascinated by that history to then in an era where they're very separate, and it's kind of starting to creep in back in again. And I would say Boulez is probably the last of that composer conductor generation. And I would love to know more about how he, got to grips with Stravinsky, but also kept his music his own.
mm.
It was like that
Well,
total.
you're right. There are more of them appearing. I mean, I think I've interviewed 4 on here, 4 or 5, but so they are around. But yeah, for a long time, the two professions were separated. Now,
Totally.
if we're going to look at clean and tidy and cleanliness and layer building and all of that, I wonder whether your favorite current conductor or conductors are in the same mold or completely different.
For me, the current conductors, I've chosen 3, and 2 I've worked with, 1 I haven't. And the reason I've chosen them is sort of for what they bring to the music and their community building and what they give out to the world. First, I have to mention Marin because she's just been such a huge influence on my life all the
Absolutely.
way, through. But on so many levels, I remember taking a masterclass, my second masterclass with her, and I was like, oh, I'm here now to show her just how great I am. This is fantastic. She hasn't seen me in 2 years, and I'm brilliant. And she sat for 20 minutes like this, looking at me. And I to use this a little bit later. And she just said to me, Karen, What's coming out of your mouth is brilliant, but your arms are all over the place. And she was right. She was so right.
Yeah.
And just little tips and tricks that she's taught me. She's one of the reasons I've picked her is because she's such a good teacher and conductor.
Mm.
And I've seen what she's done building communities and rebuilding orchestras. The second is Yannick Nizet Sagan, who I've worked with as well. And the reason I choose Yannick is because I studied from him a couple of years ago, and it was at a time where I really wasn't sure whether I was going to move back or not, and what was going on. And I wasn't the strongest emotionally. I was just going through so much of, will I take this job or that? You know how it is.
Yeah.
What's my next step? And I conducted for him, and he just put his hand on my arm and he said, Karen, I can see you're a really lovely human. And I just wanted to cry. I'm like, thanks so much. Because he made it about what you could bring to the music instead of put your little finger in and move two steps to the right and please show this downbeat. He allowed me, he freed up so much. And then I got to watch him with his orchestra in Canada and see the community that he created was just unbelievable. And the way that the musicians merged as one in that performance was something I'll never forget. It was Mendelssohn Scottish. And they lived and breathed it all together. For a professional orchestra, I think that can be quite rare sometimes.
Absolutely.
As a conductor, that every single person wanted to be there. It was incredible. And then my third is Pavel Yarvi, who I've never met or worked with, but I just love watching what he does with the music. And I love maybe the cleanliness, but also the musicality of his technique and music making.
Well, Pavel Yarvi is quickly coming up hot on the heels of Simon Rattle as one of the most popular choices.
Okay.
Yeah, so Yannick's not appeared for a while, and I'm not surprised about Marion, of course. I mean, she's an amazing human being. She really devotes her time to her Tacky Fellowship and,
totally.
and those who are in it and those who were in it. And it's building a big club, and it's very important. So really good choices. Thank you. What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
So recently I just did Symphonie Fantastique, which was emotionally a bit of a killer. And I hadn't anticipated because it's not actually hard, but it is long. But for me, there were so many ups and downs emotionally that when I'd done it in the dress rehearsal and then got to the concert, about halfway through the concert, I was like, you're going to have to find that extra 10% and push through. It was something I obviously hadn't conducted it before. So that was a lesson from that one. But one of the first operas I ever did was by a student composer in Ohio, and he changed tempo. Oh God, I'd say every 20 bars, and none of them were related. And yeah, exactly. Like not even an upbeat related. I tried to argue the point on several occasions, but I took it as a challenge, and I found a way of it was called The Story of an Hour. It was about 60 minutes long, and I found a technique to get around it, which I'll share with you. I couldn't think of what the next tempo change was because it was unrelated, and there was, maybe two the same if you were lucky. So I came up with a system of words where I would start to say words that were a specific tempo, like
that's clever.
Book, or Mississippi, Miss if it's 60 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I wrote those words on the top, and I just practiced those with the metronome. Could I say those words at that tempo? So before going into it, I'd say book, 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 or whatever it was, and get into that speed. And it's a skill that I've carried with me ever since, because we just didn't have the time to get out. You were locked in, and that was it. And good learning experience from it, I'll say.
If you've got no space in the music, it's one of the hardest things we have to do is constantly changing tempos when they're not related.
Yeah.
You can look at the music of somebody like Magnus Lindberg, and they're almost always mathematically related. You might have to think septuplets in the tempo you're currently going in, which become quintuplets in the next one. But at least there is a relationship. When there is no relationship, that's very hard. And that's a very clever way of doing it, which I've never thought of. I mean, I have my own way of thinking of a metronome mark at the start of every piece, which I alluded to on here. Yeah. Which is, I mean, and some orchestras now know exactly what this method is, and some of the front string players will ask me which pop song it is I'm thinking about, because we all grow up listening to popular music. And
Totally.
so
Yeah.
I know that 132 is Boogie Wonderland by Earth, Wind and Fire. I know that 100 is Dancing Queen by ABBA. I know that 112 is Fernando by ABBA. But the point is that it can be songs from your own childhood because there's a database online which lists it.
Absolutely.
But when
Yeah,
you're in the middle of a piece, it's much harder to suddenly think of
totally.
Unbelievable by EMF or whatever it is
Yeah.
that you need to go to. It's very difficult to do that,
Yeah. And
very
it's not
difficult.
subjective. That's the problem, is that you can't sing a melody and say how this is going to go. Sometimes it's so rhythmical that that you've nothing to grip onto. And actually, that's my third piece is a piece by Chelsea Comshalis that I studied with Marin actually as part of the course. This was the one where she stared at me for 20 minutes solid. It was written for I think 7 people, but everybody had a different line, and I was very new to new music at the time, and there was sort of nothing to grip onto, and she really taught me about grooving. Pick a
Yeah.
groove and lock into it. But again, talking about the syllables, I had, for all of the like quintuplets or septuplets or however many tuplets there were, I found a word for each of them. So I had a word for the tempo and then a word for each of them, so I could actually physicalize the rhythm right the way through. And yes, she said my arms are all over the place, but I was steady in my body that I could hear when something was wrong. I wasn't moving my arms and chancing that the rhythm would fall into place.
Yeah.
I was really trying to ground it in. So I try to take something good from everything hard that you do.
Oh God, yeah, that's very important. But
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't mean it's no less hard.
No. And I've never done either piece again. What a waste. But anyway.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
I'm going to mention two.
Yep.
My first, I alluded to earlier, it's the AirPods, just
Yes.
to calm the brain down. I just need to be in silence. And sometimes we don't have that option. So most of the time, I'm not listening to anything else. It's just silence. And the other is porridge. I always bring sachets of porridge with me because it's all I want for my breakfast. And you'd be surprised the amount of places that don't have it. And you know what it's like when you're somewhere and you have to sustain throughout the whole day if you're used to eating something and that's all you want. That's my go-to.
Now, I know for a fact that's the first time anybody's mentioned a breakfast cereal as their answer to question 7. Porridge, yeah, wonderful. Oh my God, I've not had porridge in years. Let's get really, because food is approaching at question 10. I used to like something sweet on it, like brown sugar when I was a kid, but the Scots like salt on it. Which way do you go?
I'm sugary. I throw a big scoop of sugary protein powder in.
Right.
My current one is golden syrup flavor, and it keeps me going all day. Throw a bit of fruit on top, and it's perfect.
Very good, very good. The thought of having salt there. No,
No,
sorry,
couldn't.
Scots, you can keep it.
Nope.
Number 8 is a real or fantasy question. And it is, what is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
The travel. If I could just click my fingers and be somewhere rather than have to travel. It's not, I mean, I love going and I love visiting other places, but sometimes you just want to click your fingers and be home. And that for me would be just lovely.
It's probably the most often given answer, and it's sadly unavoidable, frankly.
Yeah, exactly. You can't get
I did
around it.
once have somebody email me and say to me, why do conductors choose the orchestras so far apart that they're bosses of? And I had to write back and say they didn't choose, they accepted the gigs that were,
Exactly.
you go to the gigs of the places or the orchestras that love you and you love them, and they could be 4,000 miles apart or 6,000 miles apart,
You've
and
no
that's
choice,
just
really.
no, you have
That's
no
it.
choice. No, exactly. Number 9, what profession other than your own would you like to attempt or have liked to have attempted?
Mike, I really struggled with this one, which means I obviously love my job. But I am fascinated by sort of mental health and well-being. And I think I'd like to have gone into psychiatry or coaching people, kind of helping people get the best out of their lives, which you could kind of argue is teaching conducting in some
Yeah, yeah.
sense as well. But I do, although I'm an extroverted introvert, if that makes sense, but I do love helping people and creating communities and seeing people improve. So I think that's the way I'd go.
I I think you're right. It is linked to what we do, but obviously much more broad brushstrokes than
Yeah.
we get very, very detailed about the mindset of orchestras and the mindset of us with the orchestras. But no, I think it's a very good answer, and I think it is close to what we do. But yeah, who cares? You know, I chose architecture when I did this in question 50, which is basically the same. You're looking, you know, how you look at a score is how you would look at a building. You look at this
Totally.
beautiful thing, but you still need to know about where the wiring goes and how the water escapes from the
Plumbing.
place. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah. And finally, and as I said earlier on, food has been mentioned earlier on in question 3, so hopefully some good chow is going to appear in question 10. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Oh, this took a while now to narrow down, so I'm going to go whole hog. I developed a very expensive habit of drinking champagne. I lived in Paris for a month. You could buy it for 20 quid a bottle. So we did, and we enjoyed it. So I definitely start with a glass of champagne, something nice and bubbly and fizzy. It's a habit that it's a very expensive habit. I lived in Paris for a month with 10 other artists, and we were there to learn French. And every evening I made us have homework club, which turned out to be champagne and crisps while learning our French verbs. So a good glass of that, and then I'd follow up by some good Irish scallops.
Ooh,
Oh,
nice.
with some nice crusty bread and proper butter as well to wipe up whatever sauce they're in. And the main course, I'm going to go with duck. I'm going to go with duck à l'orange, but with proper creamy mashed potatoes.
Yes.
And some nice roasted carrots, maybe some Brussels sprouts as well, some good veg on
Oh, you were
the
doing
side.
so well until the Brussels sprouts. I was salivating.
But I doll them up now. I wouldn't just boil them. I'd, do a nice bit of a balsamic glaze on the Brussels sprouts, something really delicious. And with that, I'd have a good glass of red, nice glass of maybe Chateau Neuf de Pape or something like really rich to go with the duck. And then I'd finish off with a creme brulee, proper crispy one that I could, really crack the spoon on. And then I'd keep going, and I'd have a dessert wine with some proper good cheese, crackers and grapes, but with really excellent chutney as well. And I just eat until I'd have to be rolled out of the place.
Well, I mean, I have to say, I think I went for, I can't remember, I think I've gone for steak in Argentina twice on this. But frankly, if somebody put in front of me Irish scallops, duck in any form, and a creme brulee with those wine pairings, and then a cheese board, and I'd have to finish with a bourbon. Well, then, stick a fork in me, I am done, as they say. It would suit me wonderfully. At this point, I always find a cheesy way of saying thank you and saying, I hope that we meet again. What I can guarantee is that if we were to meet and we went out for dinner, it would cost us a fortune, because I think between us, we wouldn't stop and we'd have a great time. Thank you, Karen. It's been a real pleasure.
Mike, it's been an absolute honor. Thanks so much for having me on.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a British conductor who, after starting his own orchestra in Leicester, shot to fame when he won the very first Donatella Flick competition in 1991. Since 2004, he's been living and working in the United States, where he is currently music director of 2 orchestras. But until then, bye-bye.